Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Bante. It's a great pleasure to meet you with another talk after some time. Of course, I think I have given here several other talks, and whenever I give a talk here, I need you to pay your attention to the very essential, features, aspects in Buddhism. Of course, our effort is to bring a final solution to this, ongoing suffering. So today, I would like to talk something about defilements. I think every speaker, whenever they come here, they of course talk something related to, defilements. So when Venerable Shanti asked me to give the talk today, I just thought that it's better if I can talk something about defilement in a different perspective. A larger portion has been allocated in the original text of the Buddha to talk about these defilements. Buddhism is all about to find a final solution in the process of, in finding a final solution to the defilements. That's why I told you, if you go through the original text and the pure sense of Buddhism is based on these, the defilements, in other words, the cankers, whatever that spoils our mind, and if it is because of the same reason we are in this cycle of birth and death, then Buddha has given, he has emphasized how it is important to put an end to these, defilements. I wonder whether you may remember one day when I was giving here a talk, I told you the perfect knowledge, whatever the way we talk about it in Buddhism, it is called asavakkaya jnana. In other words, the wisdom that is based on dispelling all defilements from your mind. So my topic is the 3 levels of activation of defilements. When we talk about defilements and we don't know how it appears in our mind, and sometimes it is very, very difficult to find how it come into action. So the 3 levels of defilements, if I may bring forward, the first one is called it is vitikkama. I think you may not get angry with me whenever I mention some, whenever I talk something in Pali, whenever I mention some words in the Pali, because it can, I of course like to give those, to mention those words as the way you can believe, you can trust what I am going to say. Otherwise, you may believe that it is something that I thought of talking today. Of course, when we talk about these, the 3 levels of defilements, The first level that I mentioned earlier is nothing but it is the expression of weak thoughts. In other words, the defilements, whatever that hinder your mind, it is the expression of those thoughts through verbal and physical action. Whatever the way those weak thoughts come into our life through physical and verbal action is called vidikama. There it is quite clear that we are unable to stop it. Once it is expressed through our verbal actions or physical actions, it is very, very difficult to stop it. It's already done, that's why I'm telling it. Then the second level is called pariyutthana. Pariyutthana means the motivation of these defilements only in the mind. It has not yet come into existence. It has not yet come into action through your verbal and physical actions, but it is sleeping in your mind, always hindering your mind. It is of course in a sleep. That level is called pariyutthana. So when we come to the third level of activation of these the defilements, it is called anusaya. In Pali it is called anusaya. Anusaya means the thoughts, the weak thoughts, defilements, cankers buried deep within our mind are called anusaya. So today I would like to mention something about the theory of Sigmund Freud, who was a profound psychologist who lived in the 20th century, and at the same time who was also regarded by some as a false and faithless prophet, if I may say. And he also has dedicated a bigger part of his psychodynamic theory under the specific term, I think, libido. In other words, I can say again, the instincts. So this third category that I would like to talk very much about is anusaya. In other words, if I say deeper instinctual forces. Why it is said that deeper instinctual forces? Because they are very deep within our mind. It's very, very difficult to find it out when it is when it occurs, or how it is going to come into action. That's why it is called deeper instinctual forces. So whenever it is necessary, I would like to go into several very important sutras, the discourses of the original text, because otherwise I am unable to explain this. Now it is quite clear the three levels. So when I talk about these three levels of the defilements, the activation of defilements, in the psychodynamic theory by Sigmund Freud, he says it is something related to instincts. That's how I feel it. When I was studying the psychodynamic theory in a certain period of my life, I understood that there is some similarity in between the psychodynamic theory and the Buddhist perspective on these underlying forces, underlying tendencies. That is how Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has translated it into English. Underlying tendencies. If you go through the middle-length sayings of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Bodhi, you can definitely find this term underlying tendencies, or you can say dispositions, underlying dispositions. So Sigmund Freud, he says that human beings are all about two aspects. The first one is called the life instincts, and the second one is called the death instincts. That he had a very specific, two terms, eros and thanatos. So when it comes to eros, it is nothing but to appreciate the five sense pleasure, and when it comes to thanatos, it is nothing about very harmful thoughts. Some thoughts are related to suicidal thoughts, and whatever the way we try to to take the pleasure, to enjoy this life, can be called the eros, and while the thanatos may be the destructive thoughts. For example, the 9/11 attack, and whoever inspires others to go for war, fights, and that aspect, of course, is thanatos. In other words, the death instincts. So when I was studying these two aspects, of course, I was able to see a big, I wouldn't say a big similarity, but a similarity in between these, psychodynamic theory and Buddhist explanation. So that's how Sigmund Freud has mentioned. He has termed it. I of course see a big truth even in his exposition, his research. The reason is though he was challenged by some other psychodynamic psychologists in a later period of time, but when it comes to Buddhism, of course, I see a great value, importance of his this new finding. So of course Sigmund Freud was able to find only two aspects, which I mentioned as eros and thanatos, but when it comes to Buddhism, of course these deeper instinctual forces can be categorized into 7 steps, which is very, very amazing. Yes, those 7 categories start from the first as Kamaraga Anusaya. It is called, and at the same time I have to say that, remember the Pali word Anusaya, the deeper underlying forces, instinctual tendencies, this Anusaya. So the first one, that's why you see whenever I mention, you can hear the word at the end of the term, Kamaraga Anusaya. You see, Anusaya, Kamaraga plus Anusaya means Kamaraga Anusaya. That means the latent, that's how I translate it into English, the latent tendency of sensuous craving. That is the first one. Whatever the way you try to have the the happiness in this life by appreciating your 5 sense organs, and this can be called the Kamaraga Anusaya. In other words, the latent tendency of sensuous craving. And at the same time, I have to say that this is particularly based on sexuality also. But of course, Buddhism does not place or regard sex as the one and only important thing, in our life, as the way the Sigmund Freud did. But of course, it plays a bigger, a vital role in our life. So that is the first level. The first category. Then when it comes to the second one, it is called Patighahanusaya. You see, always you hear the word Anusaya. Patighahanusaya, that means the latent tendency of anger. It is deep. It is very deep within, very, very subtle, very, very difficult to see. Even the first one also. So when we go through these 7 categories of, the underlying tendencies, it is very, very difficult to sense them. So when it comes to the third one, it is called Mananusaya. It is conceit, the latent tendency of conceit. Everybody has got this conceit in our mind. We may say that we don't have, but sometimes we don't know that how it is activating in our mind, just like a furnace. That one is the third one. So the fourth one is called, if I am not mistaken, it is Bhavaragaanusaya or something just like that. Yes. That means, I think it is, yes, it is the Dittanusaya. Dittanusaya means the erroneous views. What are erroneous views? Here it means erroneous views means we are attached to concepts in this world. It is very, very difficult to give up. We think that the concept that I hold is correct, everything else is false. So it's very, very difficult to give up them. And at the same time, this may be related to the concept of egoism. The concept egoism. And sometimes if you are attached to some concepts in terms of religion, politics, and many other aspects. This one is called Dittanusaya, which is the latent tendency of erroneous views. So when it comes to the fifth category, it is called Vichikichanusaya. That means the skepticism. In other words, the latent tendency of doubt of what? Regarding the path leading to the final, bliss in Buddhism, and at the same time what has been explained. Whatever the doubt you have regarding the teachings of the Buddha, in other words, regarding what has been explained, to follow that path. So this is called Vichikichanusaya. It is highly essential if you are interested in finding a final solution to this, suffering, ongoing suffering. It is highly essential to get rid of these, the doubts. In other words, if you suspect or if you doubt the path, it is very, very difficult for you to, to reach that goal. This is not, Buddhism does not expect you to be, to be blind. It is not something called blind faith. But of course, you have to. You have got the total freedom, whole freedom to ask anything, question anything. Anyway, that one is the fifth one. So when it comes to the sixth one, it is called Bhavaragaanusaya, the latent tendency of craving for becoming, existence, the desire for existence. We have got that in our mind, but it is in a deep sleep. The last one is called avidyanusaya, the latent tendency of ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of the three basic characteristics and the Four Noble Truths, and at the same time one very important and one very how I can say very essential teachings of the Buddha, which is called the dependent origination. So it is because of this ignorance. Now we are in this birth of circle of birth and death in this samsara. Suppose if you can understand the dependent origination, or at least if you can go through the Four Noble Truths, or if you can at least understand the three basic characteristics in Buddhism, of course you can, it is not very difficult for you to find the final salvation. So those are the seven categories of latent tendencies, underlying forces. Now I would like to say something about how Buddha has explained this level, anusaya level, in other words the level of underlying tendency of defilements in his original teachings. There is a very particular sutra, a discourse in the original text. It is called Kemaka Sutra. This has been taught by the Buddha to a venerable monk by the name Kemaka. His name was Kemaka. This sutra is highly important because some would think that it is only through meditation that we can achieve the final salvation. But if you go through this particular sutra, it becomes quite clear that at the end of the sutra it says that the venerable Kemaka, he had a discussion with a lot of monks who lived just close to his temple. And ultimately what happened when they were discussing the Dhamma, when they were discussing the teachings of the Buddha, it is said that all of them became enlightened. All of them became the Arahants. So it's another aspect that I would like to talk on some other day. But of course I have given some, I think, a few talks about this aspect also here. So in this particular sutra, Kemaka Sutra, it is said that when it comes to talk about these latent tendencies, which are buried deep within, it is very difficult to get rid of them, even when we become the non-returners. In other words, until you become the Arahants, until you achieve the final salvation, the Arahantship, you are unable to get rid of these latent tendencies, because they are sleeping, but it is deep, buried deep within, hidden deep within. So suppose if you need to be the Sotapanna, in other words, to enter the first stream, you have to get rid of three what we call as three aspects. So the first one is it is egoism, very easy to understand, and the second one is called whatever the way we adhere to some kind of morality, and the third one is called the doubt. Doubt means doubt regarding the path. So but it is said that when we talk about egoism, the one who regarded as the Sotapanna, completely, that's how the tradition, or that's how the people believe. He can get rid of this egoism in this stage. But of course, there is something hidden, in other words, latent in his mind until he becomes the Arahant in Buddhism. So that is the Kemaka Sutra. So if you are interested, you can go through it and find many more details. Since I have a short period of time to come to an end, I would like to talk mention something about these underlying forces, latent dispositions in our mind, taking one of the sutras again in the original text. That can be found again very easily in the middle-length discourses of the Buddha by the name Mahamalunkyya Sutta. It is called the Mahamalunkyya Sutta. So this particular sutra discourse, this talk was given to a specific monk by the name Venerable Mahamalunkyya Putta. So there Buddha says that he takes a very nice simile of an infant. Now you may think that we are having all these things, but how can an infant have these latent defilements in his mind? Of course, Buddha says that though an infant does not have a concept called egoism in his mind, if somebody says that, it may sound just like ridiculous. But of course, for an infant, though he does not have something called egoism, of course, or sensual pleasures, of course, he has got something called, as I earlier told you, the underlying tendency, as Bhikkhu Bodhi translates. Those deeper instinctual forces are very, very subtle. So when it is the right time, it appears in your mind. And so though the infant does not have any idea about what those defilements are, what is sex, now you may think that infants does not have any idea about sex. But Buddha says that according to this particular sutra, it says that he has got something very deep within in his mind. When the right time comes, it appears in his mind. Sigmund Freud also found lots of things related to this aspect. I mean, if we talk about infants. So now it becomes quite clear that when we talk about these three levels of activation of defilements, the final one, the last one, the deeper instinctual forces are very deep within in our mind. And we don't know how it comes to our mind, when it will come to our mind. We may think that I am practicing the Buddha's teaching, I am a good person, and I am doing everything possible that I can find a final solution to this problem, the suffering. But it is quite clear that you have to be conscious. In other words, you have to be conscious about these underlying tendencies, because they are very, very subtle, very, very difficult to see. So that's what today I wanted to talk, share with you. And if your sole purpose is to have a happy life, I invite everybody to be conscious about these levels. And at the same time, the last one, of course, so we are unable to, no one can deny that truth. I mean, when we talk about the three levels, those three levels are equally important. So when you are dealing with defilements, weak thoughts which appear in your mind, you have to take into account these three levels. So we cannot neglect any step in these, in these three levels. Those are equally important. So when you talk something, suppose if a weak thought appears in your mind, don't let it come through your verbal and physical actions, but it is very difficult. We don't know when it is occurring, and at the same time you may not aware that when it is activating in your mind itself, without coming through verbal and physical actions, but of course it is there in your mind. When it comes to the third level, it is very dangerous. Sometimes if you go on like this, without paying any attention to the third one, underlying forces, deeper instinctual forces, sometimes we may carry it to the next birth also, and we are inherited these weak thoughts, in other words the cankers, defilements from our previous births, which is very, very difficult to find the beginning, where it comes from. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I think it's time for Q&A. Yeah.
So these tendencies, the 7 categories you were talking about, are these like the causes of when we talk about like greed, hatred, and delusion? So these tendencies are the source of those defilements?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was also wondering how that ties into dependent origination, which you were also talking about a little bit as well. So how are those connected? Because we were talking about, I think, how one of the 7 tendencies is this desire for existence, and I know that's one of the chains in the dependent origination.
Yeah.
So could you say more? I don't know if you have more to say about that.
Of course, if we talk about the dependent origination, it is quite clear that it starts from the first one, the ignorance. The dependent origination starts from the first one, ignorance. So it's everywhere. So when it comes to the dependent origination, so remember when I was going through the 7 categories of these, the underlying forces, deeper instinctual forces. So when it comes to the dependent origination, again we have got the desire, in other words the craving for existence. So likewise, it is everywhere. Sometimes very subtle, but if we go through these terms, these the aspects of dependent origination, or even the 3 basic characteristics, we can find these things everywhere.
Thank you for mentioning the Freud, because of course when you're a student, a lot of people study. So my question is, when you mention these defilements, of course we try to resolve them or avoid them, but can you use a word like repression or sublimation? Is that enough to avoid the defilements? Because, like for instance, instead of going gambling this morning, maybe I come here.
Yeah.
I suppress my gambling instincts and come here, but it seems that still, it's not quite enough. And it seems that a lot of times we, since you mentioned Freud, he talks about, say, sexual repression can also be good because it leads to building, doing positive things.
Yep.
So I guess my question is, in Buddhism, is there any kind of notion like about repression or kind of sublimating these desires or instincts? Is that enough, or is that maybe
yeah, of course, whatever the way, if you can start this process, you said that suppose if you went earlier in the morning for gambling and again you are here, it's okay, because I know that it's good enough as a start. Somehow or the other you have to start this somewhere, and if you postpone this And if you say every day that okay, I will do this one day, and it will never ever happen. Somehow or the other you will have to start this. So this is quite interesting, and of course thank you very much for saying that I talked something about Sigmund Freud. And of course you can study those things. Don't depend on my my talk. I just wanted to stimulate your passion to study those things, to see the similarities, dissimilarities, and you can agree or disagree with me, but it is very, very important, because while we go on talking these things, so while we are dealing with these things, definitely we'll be able to find a solution. I wonder whether I answered your question.
Yeah, so I think you said for the gambling, I just made this example.
Yeah, I know that.
If I gambled early in the morning but still came here, then I'm still trying to change my behavior.
Okay, my answer is, even for the worst person in this world, even for the worst person, there is a place in Buddhism.
We all have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because no one is perfect in this world. Okay.
I'm having a little trouble